Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Build Beautiful podcast. You're listening to an introduction to the vernacular architecture of the world, episode 2, where we'll be covering the Mediterranean, myself and my co-host, Slingsby. How are you doing, Slingsby?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. So, order of the events today for you guys at home is we're going to be covering 5 buildings tonight, which are the cave dwellings in Cappadocia, the Kolozek in Slovenia, the Trillo stone houses in Italy, the Finca in Ibiza, and the village of Oia in the Greek island of Santorini. So I'll just share my screen for everyone to see at home. Some boomer tech problems. So can you see that, Slingsby? Is that?
Oh yeah, it's come up.
PowerPoint. Is that right? I'll start the slideshow.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I said, order of events tonight is the Cappadocian cave dwellings, the Kozolek, the Trillo stone houses, the Finca and the Oia. We won't be doing the Towers of Bologna tonight. So here are the Cappadocian cave dwellings in Turkey. Where they were originally, it's a place where the early Christians settled in as they were being chased down by Romans. So the first people to live in these cave dwellings were Christians fleeing persecution from the Romans. Later settlers included Christians hiding away from Persian and Arabic forces. The wonderful fairy chimneys of Cappadocia formed due to a geological process that occurred millions of years ago. Volcanic eruptions covered the area in thick ash that would crystallize into a soft rock called tufa. After the natural forces of erosion had played their part, the massive tufa forms would be topped with a layer of harder rock, giving us the fairy chimneys that we see today. Some fairy chimneys rise to be 130 feet tall. Early Christian settlers discovered the malleable nature of the tufa rock and set about creating hand-carved caves, dwellings, churches, monasteries, stables, storehouses, pigeon coops, bee houses, and cloakrooms, etc. The Christian settlers created large subterranean towns in order to hide from invading troops. 36 subterranean towns have currently been discovered in Cappadocia. The largest of these is Derinkuyu, which houses 10 to 20,000 people. Derinkuyu is connected to the second largest town, Karmaklide, by way of a 5.5-mile tunnel. Large ventilation shafts were designed to look like wells, while traps were laid in place for invading forces who didn't understand the layout of the towns. Derinkuyu consists of 7 underground stories. More than 400 hand-carved monasteries, churches and chapels have been discovered in Cappadocia, many of which contain fantastic paintings and frescoes. The largest church is the Kalisti Church. The Dark Church is a monastery built in the 11th century, which is still strikingly well conserved up to this day, especially its paintings and frescoes. Most Cappadocian villages contain dwellings which are part house and part cave. The cave has warmer rooms for the family in the winter, while the attached houses tend to be lived in more in the summer months. Since the 1970s, the Turkish government has tried to rehouse cave dwellers into more modern dwellings. However, these modern buildings are poorly suited to the climate, resulting in many people going back to their cave dwellings. Many renovated cave dwellings now serve as hotels and houses for holidaymakers. Hot air balloons allow tourists to stare down at the once inspiring Cappadocian cave dwellings. And I think they have some sort of hot air balloon event during at the end of the summer or the beginning of autumn, where lots of hot air balloons fly over Cappadocia. So what are your thoughts on the Cappadocian cave dwellings, Ed?
Well, I maybe start with a slightly uncultured point of comment to begin with, but I couldn't help but feel because they're so erratic and or kind of naturally forming to the volcanic rock. There's something slightly I thought slightly sort of sci-fi or sort of alien. It's kind of hard to get grounded to them because they are so singular, and so my mind inevitably kind of started wandering to more like a concept art for a sci-fi film or something. But then I think on closer, I think what's interesting is looking on the inside and how they have been domesticated, and the little moments of refinement. And I thought you picked out in your opening there how the thermal performance of the stone, the rock, is going to it's going to be the ideal place to be in the nature of that climate. So there's something I think I mean this is it is quite quite literally one step up from just a naturally formed cave, and it's taking all the advantages of natural qualities of the local materials and tuning in with the local climate and but then I guess it's as well it's
still it's a big theme in architecture, isn't it, as well, that a cave-like structure or having something more carved, more a cave, like in terms of, I guess a classic example would be something that's on a hill site or like Peter Zumthor's like Fernvals, for instance, or something like that, or even a lot of the old churches, with the pillars or the columns that were holding them up, the big.
Do you mean in the Middle East? Gosh, it's like just. Do you mean the church? It's not the one that's carved in the cliffside. The name I almost had it, and then it went.
No, just I guess in like old like Gothic churches, you'd have like some small room or some small chapel that has like a cave-like feel. Like it feels like that room's being like just carved out of the structure, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Rather than say like a light airy building like nowadays, where it's just like have those slender columns, and it's like a wide open space. I'm just trying to think of the example. There's an example in Thinking Architecture by Steen Eiler Rasmussen.
I don't know about that. I think kind of picking up what you're saying there. I think why maybe these, obviously it's the unique kind of geological formation, but it slightly in some ways goes against our typical expectations of what at least a building is, and therefore a home. There's sort of the familiar checkpoints, and I think from what we picked up on the last time, there is, and it's something that I've kind of subsequently thought more about, is and I think it's inherent in vernacular architecture. It's those universal features that most buildings have, follow structural loads quite logically, and therefore you end up with beams and columns, and so there are these moments of familiarity even in for a good example from last time was the Japanese property, the Japanese temple, but then in this example there isn't even that you could be mistaken for not even necessarily capturing the externally that it is even a dwelling, a home, and thus an architecture. I mean, in some ways it does kind of raise raises a little bit of a question on how much of it is architecture, because it's just sort of harnessing what's there. I know I mentioned one of the vernacular architecture books I've been reading. It has this how polite architecture is, and the polite scale. If it becomes too conscious, if you're polite, you're conscious. To consciously design, you thus become less vernacular. And I think this feels in that spectrum of what vernacular is, which is very hard to define, and you always have a debate over quite the fringes of it. But I think this is is a good starting point of like a really pure. This couldn't quite literally couldn't be anywhere else, and and so you start to get a very good, I think, grounding on like what are we meaning by vernacular, and then coming of it'd be a good thing to think back to this example compared to others, in how singularly this is of that place. It couldn't even be a little bit away, because it is quite literally that place. But it inevitably, I presume as well, the way it's been carved and the way it's going to have to respond to what was available and how easy it was to carve and manipulate that rock. But I also slightly changing, but you picked up the fact that I think it's become rather touristy or hotel.
I think so. I think it's a big tourist spot now.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of it's a difficult thing. It's like you want this to somehow remain authentic and living, and I think inevitably, as much as more people get to see and enjoy things, there's something. It's almost like the vernacular, quite literally, the story, the narrative stops when it starts to becoming so conscious. So it is it is just then almost back to what I'm saying. It is quite literally then a film set. It is, it's just the background for holiday snaps.
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar to when say like a famous building, or a famous like modernist building, or any building like sort of when nobody's living in it anymore, it sort of becomes it loses that specialness about it. Like even like something like Red House, I guess, by William Morris and Philip Webb. It's it's like it's a museum now, isn't it? It's I mean, that's a great design, but you sort of it's like it's lost its original purpose. It's sort of like it's.
Well, I mean, I think
it's really lived in, isn't it? Architecture.
Well, exactly, and I was going to say, like, the sort of measure of my success, sort of the measures of a success for me in designing a house, is how well it is lived in. And does it help nourish that and sort of set the stage for that sort of life, as opposed to sort of sit in the foreground. But my analogy is jumping around a bit there, especially compared to what I was saying. But it's a very intriguing because it's just how hard it is to kind of, I think, ground ourselves to this as somewhere to live and occupy. I think it's a good thing to think about, again, in a vernacular context, is that home, but home not necessarily in where your place, but your local area, and what it is like to collectively engage with these, your local community, to engage with your local built environment.
I guess like Churchill's saying of I think he said something like we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us.
Yes. I was funny you mentioned that, because I've just been at a lecture. There's a Roger Scruton Memorial lecture series in Oxford at the moment.
Right. That sounds interesting.
It's been a bit hit and miss. There's but today there was an architect from Syria talking.
That's interesting.
And she actually was friends with Roger Scruton, much to
I think
apparently everyone's dismay.
Is it the same architect who did a lecture? Did something with him on policy exchange?
I'll just check. She wrote a book called Building for Hope, I think it is. I'll just have a look. But she was talking about that, and that quote came up, and there was a sort of discussion about how much architecture impacts us, and how much and there was a little bit of toing and froing, debate, but I mean she definitely saw that there was the ills of modernism was her book was she was taking a line between the destruction to Syria prior to the Civil War helped create this, help fester the Civil War. I'm going to completely butcher her name. It's Marwa al Booney, Marwa. So yeah.
I'll have to check her out.
Yeah.
I think she might have come up on my YouTube feed before, because watching some like Scruton lectures and videos on YouTube, and I think one popped up on Policy Exchange, I think, where they were having a discussion. It might have been about that book as well.
And she'd really drawn into. She was particularly interested in Roger Scruton's writing about home. And his thing on oikophilia, and she was trying to sort of explore that slightly further in from her point of view. And I think that is very relevant to kind of all what we're looking at, because she nicely kind of elaborated his initial idea. So when when we sort of talk about home and the domestic, there is obviously that the heart of that nuclear being quite literally our private space, but then there's also your hometown, your home, the greater home. So I'm just trying to find the name of the book, but I can't. It's not jumping out at me. What you were saying though about that interesting quote about we design our buildings and then our buildings, or is it influence us, something along those lines?
Our building. I think Churchill said, something like we construct our buildings and we shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us.
That's
so it's I was getting at that quote for me in this context is like after the like these vernacular buildings, like these cave houses, start becoming like tourist spots. How do they shape us now? Because the functions change, from being from living within those dwellings, from people being active participants to being more passive participants. Or it's not as important in their daily life anymore. It becomes more like a sculpture in a way.
Yeah, that's very interesting thought on, because I've done the tourist thing, and I've gone to Venice and such like, and
myself included,
and I remember that in particular. I must have gone to 50 churches in the week I was there. And I guess somewhat looking back, sort of to my shame, I didn't go. I didn't know. It was just to poke my head in and have a look around, take some photos, maybe do some sketching. I think to have gone to like a service, to actually kind of partaken in the building rather than just sort of hover around it, almost just like haunt it. And it is something I remember that holiday in particular as well, like taking a moment just to sit and watch. And I remember sort of watching someone run out of their home, with a bag and like lob it into a boat and then sort of unwrap it and then sort of speed off in a real panic, in a real rush. And I kind of suddenly thought, is it like that's, your kind of commute or your morning, you're rushing off to work, but in Venice. And it started to then think about like, somewhere like that that's so saturated in tourism. What is, how do you actually, it's the elusive authenticity. It's like trying to find, it's great, especially, as an architect, as someone who, wanting to learn from the greats and the masters and such like, you want to go to these places and, but then you don't want to, you want to, my goal and hope in architecture is to try and create something that has some element of authentic living. But it's somehow, it's almost like, how can I do that sort of in such an authentic, unauthentic time, and everything that I do is it's
funny you mentioned that, because speaking of authenticity, I remember when I was in Venice, I remember like seeing the cruise ship pull up to St. Mark's Square, and there's something very surreal about it. There's something like something very surreal. It doesn't feel right at all. Like, this massive cruise liner pulling up to St. Mark's Square. It's just something very off. The scale's all wrong.
And the materials and the forms and everything.
But funnily enough, Venice is still. Sorry, go on.
No. Yeah,
I'm just going to say, funnily enough, Venice, still an amazing city. It's still the incredible walkability. It's hardly any cars in Venice. I don't think they even allow cars. I'm not.
I mean, I did walk as much of it as possible, and I think there's only the top eastern corner of the top island has cars where the bridge links over. And so most of it is car free. Apart, I think I'm trying to remember if there was like scooters or something, but it's so tightly packed that it's just a nightmare. It would be, and so uneven as well. But I do recall actually how I hadn't fully appreciated, that you're going around for a week in a, not around cars and not getting in a car.
Yes.
And then suddenly when I did get back, and it was like, I realized how suddenly odd it was to be, in a busy, street with cars.
It's funny how it wasn't just you had modernism that obviously changed cities irrevocably in the 20th century, but then you had the car as well, and like modernism was a reaction to the car. It was a bad reaction, I think. It was terribly flawed in its in the designs that it came up with, but dealing with the car is an interesting design problem in terms of it's a necessity for modern life, but also it's the catch-22 of it will destroy livability and quality of life within the city if you just allow a dual carriageway or motorways to be driven through your city centre. I saw some video on YouTube the other day. I think it was his urbanism channel, YouTube channel dedicated to urbanism called, I think it's either Gecko or just bikes. And they had an interesting bit where they mentioned how, I think it was in Los Angeles or Houston during like the 1960s, 2/3 of downtown was dedicated to car parks. But trying to get that balance right is very important. And he did a great video as well on Stroads, not just bikes, and he talks about Holland having basically they don't have any Stroads in America. That famous meme have you seen online there's that there's like this tourist trap in America, on the highway, and it has like McDonalds and all these gas stations, it's like half a mile of gas stations and fast food restaurants, and it's called Breezewood.
Yeah.
Breezewood, Pennsylvania is called the town. If you Google that, it should come up on Google Images. It's like a famous meme. It shows, like the McDonald's arches. It's basically
it is starting to ring a bell.
It's to catch it's to catch people on the motorway. It's designed to
Yeah.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've got it. And I think I recognize it.
Yeah, it's that infamous meme. Yeah, and basically they don't have them in Holland because they've designated every road is either a road, i.e. in terms of it's either a motorway, which is like a railroad. It's to get from one city to another city, or from one town to another town, or from one destination to another destination, and then they have the street, which is within the city. You have a maximum travel. Maximum speed you can travel at in the city is like 20 miles per hour within the city. But then you have between the motorway and your street in the city, you have like a distributor road, which is like a transition between the motorway and the street in the city or the town. So yeah, that was quite interesting. But yeah, we digress.
Yes. Yeah, you've got an interesting section here on the underground cities. Almost can't quite believe that's actually
yes,
how deep it is.
Yeah, to lower the level of this stream, it reminded me of something out of Indiana Jones with
yes, yeah.
Some of the traps and that. I think is it the second Indiana Jones? There's some sort of
the Temple of Doom, is it, with the
Temple of Doom.
The mining carts that and they're on mining carts. They're going through tunnels, tracks.
Yeah, there's always some booby trap he lays as well, isn't there? Or he misses, because he's dealing with like archaeological sites. He's running away.
Like boulders and such like.
Yeah.
I think it does show the level of ingenuity as well. What was, I forget again the age of these. When were they constructed, or over what period?
I think they were started in the early Christian period, when they were the Christians were getting hunted down by Romans, and then also when Christians were getting hunted down by Persians and Arabs. So
the level of sophistication here is and it's incredibly complex and impressive level of infrastructure or work when you see that it's this big. The other thing that does make me think is what's the subsequent damage to it, or the change over that number of years. How good it must have, how maybe it's become a bit more rounded and softened over the generations, and not just through weathering but through damage, or further kind of work. Just a intriguing side point about the time and everything. Yeah. Have you got some more photos from within?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I've got some photos of the frescoes, and some of them have they're being conserved, and then others are still they've not been conserved as much. You see, like the rust and the wear and tear. So yeah, speaking of the boulders, like Indiana Jones.
Oh yeah.
Or should I say, Indiana Jones copied that probably. I imagine it was probably an influence for some of the scenes. But again, I don't want to lower the quality of the stream by talking about Indiana Jones.
It's an inevitable kind of cultural references that are flooding our minds.
Yeah, you can't avoid them.
Yeah.
So this is a tunnel connecting Derin Yuku to other underground cities. So that's quite an interesting piece of infrastructure. It makes you wonder how they actually went about constructing it in the dark, or they have candles.
Exactly, but and the amount of material they're shifting, sort of where to. It makes me think even more about how different we are physically as well as mentally, because there's sort of the sort of men that would have had to have shifted that sort of rock.
Yeah.
That it's something else.
Yeah, was it interesting you mentioned that, because I was listening. I think I was listening to an AA stream the other day. I think it was one of his ones on Everla. When he had his Everla day. I think someone mentioned. I could be wrong, but I think someone mentioned something about the Crusaders. When they went from France to all the way to Jerusalem and took Jerusalem.
Oh yeah, that rings a bell. I think I heard that about talking about like how great
talking about like how hard nobody nowadays would have the physical or the metaphysical will.
That was it. Yeah, the conviction, the spiritual kind of drive, but also the physical. Yeah, as you say, because I think it isn't. It's not just like, oh, that's your gym buddy.
Not just your gym bro, not just one more
bro. Yeah, that's it. That it's something else.
They talked about, and they mentioned as well, because I quite like combat sports myself, but then they mentioned something about maybe Everlay thinking you're cheapening the act of violence by having your boxing match or your mixed martial arts match. It's sort of cheapening the act of violence, compared to something like the Crusades, where it was the metaphysics of it and the spiritual nature of it.
Like chivalry, they were mentioning, and so I think Evelyn enjoyed fencing, so there's something that's elevating, not just sort of a bit too crude, unrefined.
Yeah, I think they've got like a fine tradition in the East of the martial arts in places like China and Japan of using the martial arts to develop the spirit as well, not just the physical. But yeah, this is one of the frescoes in one of the churches, El Mali Kalisti Church fresco. I think this one has been it's had some conservation work done to it.
It does look surprisingly vivid. Maybe
I think it's had some work done recently. And then you can see this one's, it's had quite a bit of wear and tear over
Yeah.
the years. This is one in a Kalisti Church.
It's interesting to see that it becomes more recognizably formal architecture here. You almost you could be mistaken this isn't it's the Romanesque arches and everything that are the typical forms of a period.
Yeah.
But how is this thing? Where is this in context to the main tunnels and everything? Is this?
I'm not sure actually. I think
I'm just thinking that's.
I'm guessing it's just behind. I'm guessing it's not deep into the cave. It's just it's near the outside.
Yeah, because it looks like some sunlight there, if potentially, but it's a space that big. Can't be that deep.
Yeah, so some of the buildings have exteriors built off the rock face.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting moment of that blend of the rock face and then the ordered brick. So yeah, I was trying to think of.
And this is the I think the balloon festival that I mentioned earlier, or the balloon event. Yeah. I think it happens once or twice every year.
Probably a sponsored ride somewhere, pay lots of money for maybe an ad. Virgin Media.
A good Instagram photo though.
Quite.
So next up we have the Kolozek in Slovenia. So the Kolozek can be found in the country of Slovenia. The Kolozek is a hayrack and is one of the most recognizable pieces of vernacular architecture within the country. It is part of the country's folk tradition. The Kolozek was first documented in 1689. The Kolozeks were traditionally used by farmers to dry hay, vegetables and grain. Tens of thousands of Kolozeks are dotted around Slovenia. The most elaborate type of Kolozek to be found in Slovenia is the toplar. The toplar is constructed with the use of timber columns, timber floor beams and timber roof trusses. The Kolozek is the toplar is what you're seeing before your eyes now. The hay is often hung on the horizontal stud members between the columns in order to dry. The toplar often has intricate ornamental details as seen in this image. The ground was often used in the past to store equipment such as wagons. The first floor was usually used for storage purposes and was accessed by a staircase which led to a balcony, as you can see in the image on your screen. Thatch, clay tiles or wooden shingles would typically be used to cover the overhanging roof. Other types of hayrack to be found in Slovenia include the following: single straight line hayrack. So you can see how it works there, with how the sunlight and the wind from underneath and at the side would dry the stuff that the farmers would hang on it. So yeah, the farmers would hang the hay on the sides of the on the hay rack, and yeah, sun and wind would help to cool it. So other types of hay rack to be found in Slovenia include the following.
So I've
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Oh, you went off there, Ed. I think it might have been me, but what was you saying?
I was just so I've been watching a few series lately about recreating farms, actual working farms from different periods. So there was one that was 1620, and then a Victorian one, and then Edwardian farm that I'm currently watching. And it was interesting that in the 1620s, they make a hay store and follow like an English vernacular of how that would have been made.
Oh, that's interesting.
Immediately sort of seeing parallels between that, but this shows sort of, as archaeologists are on it and stuff, and they're trying to kind of work out, understand why things, not just read about it, understand the nature of what was going on, and how like precious these crops were. When you had a good crop, to then have it stay dry throughout the winter was how you survive, and your cattle, your various and so these were like paramount features of the farm. Because as well, you can't, because you can't let it go. You don't want your hay to go mouldy, to get infested with rodents and such like. But it's such the show that I was watching, and then even clearer here, it's like it's this moment of kind of great beauty and charm, and in something that is really kind of it's industry in if that's is that a bit too bold to say, but it's a critical function, but immediately as you're telling the nature of these these structures, you could imagine, and I is nicely kind of featured in this show I've been watching, where the men come together and they go out and find the timber, and then they start process of forming this together as a community. And there'll be a generational thing of presumably the elders would have built ones before, and they'd be teaching the young, so it's I guess it's interesting to see these not just as their end result, how much this would have been quite a particular activity, both in their formation and then in their usage, and how lively they would, I guess, how precious it all was, and bringing in the harvest and then ensuring that it stayed safe and good for throughout the winter. And it's great seeing the plethora of iterations. The poor, you've got the really smart one that you had at the start, quite elevated, quite a bit showier. But then the next one it's still you can spot all the familiar characteristics, like that nice waving overlapping slats of timber, but a slightly more modest, less refined version of it. But I guess that also would have may have been like a kind of aspirational quality to it, that this isn't just your, it shows that you can look after your hay and provide for your family well, and this is how bountiful we are, that we can add these embellishments and such like.
There's yes, an interesting point you make there. What was the program?
So
called again?
So it's a series that it was actually on the BBC back when they did pretty good stuff. It's called the first one's called Tales from the Green Valley. I think it is on YouTube for free. And then so it's a few like archaeologists and historians more or less live in a farm for a year, and then there's subsequent series. There's a Victorian farm, and then a Edwardian farm, and I think another one as well. But they actually, it's rather than kind of just like setting something up for a bit, I feel like maybe there's some trickery involved a little bit, so they're not entirely there for a year, but they clearly are there for significant chunks of time and embedded into the ways of life. It's an it's an intriguing intriguing process of it's that debate about somewhat authenticity again, but it's playing somewhat dress up, isn't it? LARPing, but at the same time, it's interesting what they reveal, and the comments on the show. It could be comments from from kind of AA's your average AA fan, but they're sort of like
Trumpton, I imagine.
Well, yeah. I mean, but what's interesting is these sort of layman normies kind of going, it's funny what they say. Like they're like, oh, it's so hard work. People had it so rough, blah blah blah. It's really, life was so difficult. And then at the end of the series, they're like, I'm going to be devastated to be leaving. I've got to go back to the modern world. It's like, it's interesting. It's like, and they're up at the crack of dawn, working dawn till dusk, and they talk about how like their strength improves, their stamina improves. I think I see like getting slightly off the architecture here, but it's purpose. It's like being so full of purpose and activity that you're not going to be navel gazing and dwelling about pathetic self-indulgent things. You're concerned about your hay, keeping it dry, making sure there's not making sure that it's not rotting or getting damp or getting infested with anything. You want to make sure your cattle's okay, and it's gonna your buildings are gonna stay up in bad weather, and it's sort of, there's something immediate and vital and more alive, but you're slaving away, so to speak, as they say, hard work, brutal life. I think it would be interesting almost to you just sort of look at like the farming structures and farming from different countries, different cultures, and these sorts of structures, that how they emerge, and you think if this was at a time when it was super hard effort to do everything, but they still did these beautiful kind of embellishments on it, and
those beautiful ornamental details.
Yeah, if it was so impossibly and horribly hard, they'd have just done the bare minimum, and they
I think Scruton has a great a line in his documentary Why Beauty Matters, when he says about ornament, something like, ornament reminds us that we are spirit. Ornament reminds us we are not. Ornament reminds us that we don't just eat, drink, and sleep. We have moral and spiritual needs too, and if they go unsatisfied, then so do we. Something like that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. You see how you see ornament throughout the world. Every culture and civilization has it, on every continent pretty much. Whether it's Europe, Africa, Asia, Oceania, North America, South America. Every people all across the world, they all have them. Every race, every creed. They all have these ornamental details, which are dedicated to, which are derived from their religious and derived from the religious and the religious and mythological metaphysics, that underpins their society.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, I guess it somewhat goes without saying, but it shows how much modernism is actually the deprivation of, of ourselves, of us in the mix of it, us as spiritual, as the transcendental quality of what it is to be human. It denies that. It just sees us as a unit, as a commodity. As the same. We are just a brick to a panel to a human. Whereas, as soon as you start to have this aspiration and
it's creating the new. They say that old saying, creating the new Soviet man. Well, I mean, modernism tried to do it with the social engineering, trying to create the new man. And on the other side of that, you have you have capitalism, and then you have your socialism. But they're often two sides of the same coin, which I think we're seeing that now. What with the Davos crowd and and the socialists from the Soviet Union, because it was back in the day Wall Street that funded the Bolsheviks. And then you also have talking about the unit, as you say, you see that with the brutalist social housing that they made in the post-war period, with Le Corbusier's Unité de Habitation, which was the most influential building in the post-World War II period. It's literally called Unité de Habitation, which translates from French into English as unit of habitation. You can't get anything more dystopian than that. But then also you have it, I think, with your capitalist skyscraper, whether it's in Canary Wharf or in London or in Johannesburg or Shanghai or Melbourne or New York or Sao Paulo, all around the world, they have the same might be a housing block for the rich, or it might be your office block where everyone's a unit basically.
Or well, the unit there is it's like a financial. It's like your money. As opposed to a worker or something, or a commodity.
Or not just the financial side, but also just like if it's a massive office block for a global corporation, then you obviously have the financial side of it, your financial units, but then also you have your workers chained at the desks, basically, in like units, they're very,
I think I think if we are just going to stick with this slight tangent, but it's the great thing of architecture. It takes you everywhere.
But I was going to make a point about that. It was because you made an interesting point about the honesty of the farm work. When they go into the forest to collect the wood, to actually construct these hay racks, and they need this hay to survive, the winter, or just to sustain themselves. And you need honesty in that situation. You can't have any lying, cheating, or stealing going on, because you won't build any high trust society. Also,
exactly,
it's interesting. I think with I think Jordan Peterson mentioned something about. It's interesting how Joseph is a carpenter in the Bible, because that is inherently. You have to be a good person fundamentally, to be good at that job. In terms of you can't cheat at that job, basically, because if you construct a house for someone and that house collapses, that you're going to get it's going to come back onto you. Whereas, say with the bankers anyway, there isn't. We don't we don't get that with our current banking system anyway, do we? With we don't call them honest. Yeah.
Quite.
I don't want to tart every banker, but I mean, it's.
But I guess it's a system. Maybe this is the harder question of we're kind of trying to address, is like it's the system that they're part of. This sort of, and I guess it's what I feel like these structures, you understand the why and what's going on here. It's there's survival, but there's also communal sort of celebration and identity and engagement with place and such like, and it's also it's looking to the future. It's it's got a foot in the past, as in it's learning from their ancestors how to grow to grow this crop and to create this structure, but it's also looking into the future that we need this hay to feed our cattle through the winter, and so we can feed our children, and and they can then have children. It's got this it's
fundamentally a system
where
I think where you can see what's happening in your community. If someone's building a hay rack, you can see who's building it. And you can. Whereas I'm with your farmer, you can see the farmer in your local community, tilling the land and so on and so forth, and the food gets to your table because of the work that he does. Whereas I guess in the modern world, it's so complex, and there's so many abstract systems where we live nowadays, where people aren't connected to their leaders as much, if you know what I mean. Like the the leaders in the farming community you'd see on a day-to-day basis within the village or
yeah. I think that's you're kind of making you're kind of picking up on part of what I was saying, because if you compare that to now, especially to the sort of high modernist stuff that we get at the moment, does it equally look back to the past and look into the future, and is there also a sense of a people around this, and but this I guess you can see both the function of it, the kind of the cold hearth kind of physical survival, but there's also, I think, a bit more of a metaphysical kind of survival going on as well, and I think the cold architecture of today sort of denies both of that, and that's, I guess, our economic global man doesn't look into
citizen
the
of the world.
Yeah, they don't. They don't look into the past. They don't look into the future. They don't. They're told to deny their history and their heritage. They're also told not to have a family and not to settle down and not to engage in future planning. You just live in the forever moment of now, and there is no consequence. There is no anything. And I think, isn't that, to me, like the nightmare, the most horrendous thing? And I think it's all emblematic in the environment that we're being offered, isn't it? And that came up in this talk today, or this lecture I was at. That it's the architecture today is almost there to break us, to control us, to
I mean, I think
us.
I mean, like the unity dehabitation, that for me is it's the proto Bugman flat. It's what the World Economic Forum types love. Like the Klaus Schwabs of the world love that type of building, because with a unity, you'd never have to leave your flat. It's
quite.
You don't have to go into the outside world. And you can see that's basically what they want now. With I'll try. They don't want anyone to travel anywhere, do they? Basically. I'll try. I'll try and keep it civil. I don't want to get thrown off YouTube, but yeah.
Well, I think trying to keep this back into this example, I think it's something that I'm thinking on that's come up with the things I've been looking at and reading, and I guess AA has brought this up of what do we prefer to be, this sort of soft kind of man of today that just sits in their unit, but has an endless entertainment and culture at our fingertips to watch, and be perfectly climate controlled, deliver food to ourselves, and or in this sort of super soft world, or do we want to be working the field, not dusk till dawn, weathered and calloused hands and sore back, and it's like we kind of look back, and I hear it on this documentary I've been watching. This same thing. It's like, oh, it's such hard work, and it's like, is that a bad thing? It's like it's like the given, like how great it is that we no longer have to work hard. I mean, I guess this is also venturing into the carrot pill phenomena thing that, like, but I think. I mean,
it's there though, isn't it? I think it is there. The carrot pill and that. I mean, but into like mean, you see it in, I guess, the arts and crafts movement in a way. You know, the caterpillar in terms of the risk or the it's almost on the same. The caterpillar is almost on the same side as like John Ruskin's notion in that he expounds upon his great chapter on the nature of the Gothic. You know, on the nature of work in itself. You know, he's talking about like the medieval craftsman, and you know, there's you know, finding joy in the work that they were obviously, you know, did in the medieval period. You know, building the cathedrals. There was obviously a spiritual nature to that work. You know, and you had you know, better metaphysics, you know, than we do nowadays, where it's all, you know, it's all to do with materialism and, you know, profit and you know, production is always a good thing, and freedom is always a good thing, and that results architecturally in you know, your skyscraper.
It's just, it's like what's the goal? It's like what does everything lead to in it? Well, either it leads to nothing, or it, I just feel like there's no focal point almost. There's no heart to it, and I think quite simply, it doesn't have to be complicated. Or you know, it's you know, it's family. It's you know, it's all that that you know, the nomadic global man is you know, it's all the opposite. It's all that he stands against. Anyway, should we move on?
I just want to briefly mention how what do we call it? How Scruton, he's got something in his Building Better, Building Beautiful report that he did for the government on. He has a brief bit on like barns, I think, or you know, some farming buildings. You know, one they made, you know, just contrasted one made in the vernacular style, and then another made in the, you know, just concrete breeze blocks and you know, just your standard steel columns, just purely utilitarian structure. But I'll finish off on the Kolozek. So other types of hierarch to be found in Slovenia include the following: single straight line hierarch, and then the single straight line hierarch with cat slide roof, the double straight line hierarch, the roofed double hierarch with extension, roof double hierarch with shed, split level double hierarch as well. And then it makes sense as well to construct the hierarchs with timber, since 60% of Slovenia is covered in forests. Nowadays, other buildings have replaced the Kolozek as a means of storing agricultural produce. However, the Kolozek remains a symbol of Slovenia's agricultural heritage, and many farmers retain them as status symbols. They are also still used for traditional ceremonies such as weddings and holiday celebrations. So, just picking up on that last point, I said it's similar to what we talked about, you know, with the cave dwellings and you know, Venice and things like that. In terms of you know, they're not as used as much nowadays. You know, they have like industrial type buildings for storing agricultural produce.
Yeah, all that heart and poetry and beauty is gone. and it also speeds up the the loss of that land, I think, or the loss of you devalue it. The devaluation perpetuates. Anyway, the next one.
So the next one is the Trullo stone houses in Italy. Trullo stone houses are typically found in the Istria Valley in the Italian region of Apulia. The largest concentration of Trullo stone houses is to be found in the town of Alberobello, which has more than 1,600 of them. It is thought that these dwellings were first constructed in the 17th century. The Trullo stone houses originally used as storehouses and permanent dwellings by agricultural labourers and small landowners. There are many theories as to their origins. One theory is that they were built due to the high taxes placed on property. People built these houses using dry stone walling construction so that the houses could be easily dismantled whenever tax inspectors were nearby. The Trullo stone houses typically consist of a rectangular plan. Rectangular or square, the Trullo stone houses typically consist of a rectangular plan building that has several rectangular or square rooms in it. Each rectilinear room is topped by a conical roof, and archways are used to connect each room. The walls of Trullo stone houses are typically between 0.8 meters to 2.7 meters in thickness and between 1.6 meters to 2 meters in height. Roughly worked boulders are used for the walls, which are laid directly onto the bedrock without the use of any foundations. Dry stone walling was used to construct the walls. No mortar is used. The cavity between the interior and exterior walls is filled with stone rubble. The walls were typically pierced with small window openings. The thick walls typically provided a good insulation in the winter months as well as a cool environment in the summer months. The double-skinned conical roofs are constructed through the use of corbelling. Corbelling consists in the laying of courses of stone in which each successive course of stone projects ever so slightly more inward than the previous stone course. The roof is then topped off with a sandstone pinnacle. The pinnacle was often the distinctive trademark of the stonemason and could end up being a ball, a bowl, cone, disc, polyhedron, or a combination thereof. Also, they had they'd paint like a Christian cross on the roof, or they'd paint a pagan symbol as well. It was if it wasn't a Christian symbol, they'd paint on the roof. It'd be a pagan symbol. So, what are your thoughts on these buildings, Ed?
Well, I was quite drawn to the their scale and level of detail and the nature of how they're constructed.
They have a romantic, magical charm, don't they?
I was just thinking, as you're going through those pictures, I was just thinking that they are very charming. There's I guess a very I think it's, the more I see it, the scale, they are very tangible, and I think maybe they play up to the almost toy-like, and almost sort of a little bit mysterious, but in a harmless mystery, like a little bit fairy tale. And I'd say not taking a film reference here, but a literary reference, a little bit Hobbit like.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well.
I'm in the sense of scale. I'm thinking, the construction process here. It's this double-skinned roof. I'm quite intrigued by, and the fact that it's curved. It has, by the nature of the angle that it's at, and all the tiles, I think are very slightly. I'm reading, they're just very slightly angled down. So even though they kind of look flat, but they the water runs off, and you have a presumably successfully dry property below. So you've got a very successful roof system there. I'm intrigued looking as well, though, just kind of continuing on the roof, that there's one example I've got here that it's kind of married with roof terraces. So I wonder if these was it in the description? I just wonder if almost this sort of what's the nature or purpose of these, almost because they're sort of humble, but then also somewhat, dare I say it, you're looking at the rest of the structure a little bit unnecessary, because but unnecessary can be very good, I think. Just looking, I was just curious, but just having a look a little bit more about the history of them. I think a very, very culturally distinct. Well, I'm just thinking. I'm just questioning what I'm saying. I'm just wondering how Italian they feel. But I think this is maybe what I think these. I'm going on my limited knowledge of not actually having been to the area, but I feel like these are picking up on a very super local character, because I feel like almost saying, thinking of them as Italian is almost too broad. It's almost like trying to think of a comparison. It's kind of like the Cotswolds in England are quite distinctly the Cotswolds or the Yorkshire Dales.
Yeah.
There is a you can't just sort of do a sweeping statement that's just
I mentioned they're they're mainly to be found in the town of Alberobello, which has more than 1,600 of these buildings. They're typically found in the Etria Valley in the Italian region of Apulia. So it's just that part of Italy that they're found in.
And it's right down south. Interesting, yeah.
They're a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well now. I think since the 90s.
Yeah, that inevitably I feel conflicted by that again. Like, does that just mean it is the toy town? It is,
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah,
it's
a united, it's a UN organization, isn't it? So it's as well, it's
yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. Well, now, I'm just having a look at the wider area. I'm just kind of curious how it kind of fits in. I kind of I'm trying to imagine what it's like. In a more of a modern setting, it's like, just fearing, like looking around the corner, that is, a big car park or something.
That'd be tragic.
Yeah.
But looking at these buildings, I think Christopher Alexander said something like, most of the world's most beautiful places aren't designed by architects; they're designed by people. The local inhabitants in the areas that they live.
Yeah. Well, that is part of the changing nature of the profession. That it wasn't, historically it wasn't the sort of kind of know-it-all, designers, architects to turn up, right, this is what it's going to be, and design every facet down to the nth degree. You probably would have done something like that for your churches, your cathedrals, but even then they were a kind of a constantly unfolding story over many years. But for your homes, it would have been your masons as all, it would have been, or just your regular person, man, that just needed a house, and would respond accordingly. I think as soon as you start getting architects involved, it probably ceases to be vernacular, and starts to lose that, sort of starts to divide, starts to separate it away. It's definitely how I mean, speaking as an architect, I kind of I kind of feel like I have to go against all my teaching, even call it teaching, because I kind of think, I almost think all I should be doing is just kind of just distilling or drawing out what's already there, and I shouldn't get preoccupied with me in the equation, and I think that's how to try and attempt to produce something good. To try and taking that ego out of it, or that but I don't think that that wouldn't have been a problem with, I guess, something like these. They would have been inevitably a collective endeavor. I'm intrigued, like the I've got one photo here. It's the same one.
So did your tutors ever tell you, Ed? I'm quite lucky to have some great tutors. I did my architecture degree, and they always stressed, even though they were, I don't know what to call them, maybe modernist with a small m, if that makes any sense. They liked neo-vernacular architecture, I guess, even though that's an oxymoronic term. So I guess they preferred modernism with a regional feel to it, specific to its site and its brief, specific to its location. But they always stressed to me the importance of an appropriate response,
that I had similar, but
because you don't know. Well, it depends what tutors you get as well, don't it? If you're going to get, I can't imagine any Zaha Hadid saying, you got to have an appropriate response, or it's beneficial to have an appropriate response to the site and the brief.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely there's definitely the tutors out there that are, and architects generally, that are a bit more pragmatic and or a bit more down to earth, a bit more realist, and context quite literally means context. But there was an awful lot when I was studying that was, it wasn't good enough to go, this is your aspects, and this is key local features and gradient, and any sort of physical site analysis. That was that's just obvious, that stuff. A lot of it is, but also a lot of it is surprisingly how much you miss that, and you don't always tune into it. The stuff that I had to deal with was, I call it pseudoscientific studies, and so it'd be like you'd have to come up with some sort of method or process of analyzing or sort of engaging with your site, and you'd get some kind of data points from that, or whatever it may be, and you'd create a nominally pretty image or something that looked striking, something that had a bit blurry and crazy, and maybe some buzzwords in it, and you kind of present that on a page, and if you could spin it well and make a kind of glitzy, crazy image, even if it kind of sounded kind of plausible, then you're away. I remember one. I think it was one. One student. This girl had recorded sound at different points around the site, and then turned that into a site plan with the sort of sound lines, and the tutor loved it. Like, it meant nothing. You couldn't grasp anything from it. She just loved it, like this sort of hybrid sound graph site plan. And I guess it's the term, all these terms have been co-opted inevitably, but it's like context, to the layman, to the normal person, means your context, what you see. You quite, to an architect, it means, who knows what it means. But also the danger as well is this sort of, I used to work for an architect that was more postmodernist, and they designed their own house in Oxford in a terrace, and they bought this sort of end terrace bit, and they demolished most of it and then sort of rebuilt it, but like picking up weird contextual features to create this very irregular property. But they were going on about how like contextually engaged it was, because it like picked up on the certain angles, and fought against, it sort of straightened up, and then it went against the angles of the terrace. Whereas it just looks like a bit of like, a broken tooth in a terrace row, it's very, it's funny how, even, I guess, from this, obviously on my perspective on this, but it's like even these like fairly, you would have thought, solid words, can still be corrupted and lead you astray from, or be used as an excuse to lead you away from just engaging with what's there. And
I think it seems like the bigger schools are the worst offenders for that.
Well, I was going to say, I think you may have. I think
Cambridge and Bartlett and.
I probably, my advice to anyone who would like to study architecture, I'd say go provincial. You might not quite have the same kind of glitzy CV if you went to the Bartlett, but you'd at least, you might stand a chance to hold your own a bit, especially as it sounds like your tutors, because you studied up north as well. As well as, So the mere fact that your tutors are not London centric, because where I studied in Oxford, and a lot of my tutors were from London, and so there is inevitably that's you've got that London centric outlook, whereas I think if you're as an architect, being provincial is quite a bold move, even if you are a modernist.
I think as well, it seems like anyway that with say the likes of your bigger schools like Cambridge or Bartlett, I don't know if this is the case, but it seems like whenever they do it like a project, they won't do like it won't be like a local project. It'll be like, say they might be based in London or Cambridge or wherever, but say they're based in like London, but then they'll be designing a building in Sydney or Shanghai or Sao Paulo or Johannesburg or New York or wherever. Whereas they're not. It's inherently against what you were talking about there with your site analysis and analyzing the plan and the going to measuring the site and thinking about when you go to the site, you have like initial sketches and ideas and building your site model and trying to get a feel for the site and like the light and the sun and
it somehow dismisses. I think this is for people who haven't had to go haven't gone through it. It's kind of shocking, like how much all that stuff is dismissed with the claim that it's easy, that it's like, there you go, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. It's like but it's like to really understand these things and to all the infinite varieties of subtle arrangements of the wider geographical context and local features, prevailing winds and such like
bioclimate design.
We're just there's great value and importance in engaging all of that, and at least from my study, everything. So often things were it's like anything that was conventional or the traditional thing in the broader sense of that word. So whether it be like traditional hand drawing to site analysis, it always sort of felt like, okay, we have to quickly touch on this because it's actually really easy or really boring, or there's something better to get onto. And then the thing that it was always to get onto was to something very abstract and detached.
What I was saying before about say having a student based in London, but they're designing a student project in based in Shanghai or Johannesburg or Melbourne or any city around the world, is that it inherently leads towards designs which could be placed anywhere in the world, which the big sins of modernism is, you have your modernist building, it's rootless.
Well, it's absolutely, and but it's also it implies that the arrogant assumption that an architect, their little toolkit that they're given, you can fly them anywhere and they can design something in that location and properly engage with that. I can't go on enough about how much I dislike the Scottish Parliament building, and the history of it, as well as the how much was spent on it is eye-watering. But
was it close to $1 billion?
Yeah, I think it did get to $1 billion. But this building, it was shown to us in a lecture with the tutor was, almost like, it was almost speechless with how much he loved this building, and he did on a few occasions just like in a rather sort of pathetic way, like have to stop and sort of go, I just love this building. But even in that lecture, he told me that, he told us all, that the architect, who I forget his, where he's from, but the architect, who was Spanish or something, was flown in, driven around Edinburgh. He looked out the window a bit, spotted something about sails, and was like, "Yeah, that's what Edinburgh is all about." And then buggered off home, and came up with this sort of these weird sort of sail pod things, which is, I think, part of the reason why it's so expensive. It's like, it is, irregular, odd structure, everything's bespoke, and somehow he thinks he's captured Scotland or Edinburgh in this building. I mean, that situation is repeated around the world. You think, these big egos have flown in and think that they can somehow, their education, their learning, their vision can tune in to anywhere, and like, I believe that I can really only design in England, and probably even the south of England, just because I've kind of grown up there. This is where I work currently, and it's probably only the time it takes to really attempt to even half master the styles and vernaculars of that one region. That's a lifetime in itself. And I guess that, why would I know how to design in Japan or something, or I wouldn't, and I don't think I should expect to.
It can take a long time to master light as well. I think, people think, all the different things you can do with light and shade, and
I mean, that is where ornament, the power of ornament, you've got it even in a really modest way, but a brilliant way. It's the finial at the top of this section here. That part of what is great about that finial, is you get that the side in shadow, and but it's not just a question of one side's dark, one side's light, but it's the shapes create more shapes out of that, and the most sophisticated form of that really is the classical moldings. Those classical moldings are all about the shadows that they cast. It's more than just what you're actually sculpting physically. I think as well, you've got to imagine these things lit, in the night by natural lighting, flame of candle and a lantern or something. That's a very particular kind of light that we don't. That's another luxury that we have. Just perfect illumination.
Yeah. So this is a model here.
Oh yeah, I was looking at this. This is great.
Yeah, I love this.
Because it as much as I wonder if that has been sort of glued down and everything, but you still can get the sense of the construction principle there of how you stack the stones up to support themselves.
Yeah, that's a great model, that. It's a nice little door and roof detail there.
Yeah.
It's quite ornamental as well, in a way. I think Christopher Alexander talks about as well how it's natural to have ornament in, it doesn't necessarily have to be, grand gestures. It can be in your, where you, in your window opening or your door opening, or where the roof and the wall meet. Can often be quite a nice, decorative detail.
Yeah, exactly.
And here you see some of the finials and then the pagan symbols painted on the roof.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious if those painting the symbols on the roof, sort of when they came along, if that was sort of later, the sort of great, almost big canvas there you've got. So they were drawn to it to decorate it further.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting feature.
And the little bit of the little bit of personality of the builders coming through with the finials, which is great. It's a really common common thing of those little final touches, especially in roofs. I think in thatch, that there's moments there for the local, the craftsman to add their little bit of personality, because there's variation. You can express yourself a bit, but they know their limits. They know how far to push it, and it's not about taking the stage or turning everything up on its head.
So next up, folks, we've got the Ibethan finca. So the Ibethan finca is the traditional farmhouse of the Balearic island of Ibiza. It is thought that the Phoenicians introduced this style of architecture to the island, along with the long cubit measurement, which was used to construct them. The long cubit was still being used to build fincas into the 20th century. Interestingly, there isn't much evidence of Islamic, Roman, or Greek influences. These houses were usually placed on the high point of a hill, with the natural rocks on site being used for the foundations. The steep site protected the building from floods, as the building was usually built into the sloping hill. The entrance was placed to the south in order to receive sunlight. The distinctive design elements are the building's quadrangular modules, flat roof, thick walls, and minimalism, expressed in its whitewashed walls and lack of ornamentation. The building usually starts with a porxo, which is the major hall, and extra quadrangular modules get added as and when the family needs. Typical reasons for adding extra modules include the needs of a growing family or more success in farming. New modules were accessed from the porxo, which is the main hall. Walls are typically very thick and made with dry stone and mortar. Roofs are typically made with juniper, sand, clay, and marine plants. All materials used to construct the farmhouse are found on the island. Windows are usually small and contain no glass, and were used primarily to allow air into the building rather than light. Small openings acted better if the building came under siege as well. Kitchen walls were usually black with soot, due to inhabitants mainly cooking on the floor. No two fincas are ever the same, but the same elements are used to construct each one. No two fincas are ever the same, but the same elements are used to construct each one. Each farmhouse was usually warm in winter and cool in the summer, due to the building's bioclimatic design. The white keeps the building from overheating in the summer as well. Techniques and rules of construction and design were passed orally from one generation to the other. No plans were written down. So, what do you think of this building?
I guess I have to admit, I struggle with it a little bit. It's so stark, and
yeah,
I guess it's hard to, especially some of the kind of cleaner photos. There's some other ones I've got here. I can't help but think of like Corb's Villa Savoie, that modernist white.
I think he was influenced by the thing in Oya as well, or Santorini. I think a lot of the modernists apparently were influenced by those two vernacular buildings.
But I think, well,
I get the sense with these buildings though that they're meant to be they're designed to be lived in rather than just have a photo taken of them. I like with the Villa Savoie, which I think is an interesting design spatially. I've never been to see it in real life, but the photos of it always leave me feeling cold. I feel like there's a coldness and a sterility to it. And also, Corbusier didn't like people, adding their own furniture and things like that. So,
yeah, I mean, I think,
because inevitably as well, people are going to they want to add their own touch to the house, don't they? To the building, they're going to put whatever pots and plants or their own decorations and so on and so forth.
Well, that just normal human life. It's,
just not Corbusier was a bit of an autistic man. If you've ever read any of his books, you get that. I think that comes across.
Yeah. I guess with these, I would say I'm feeling like it successfully does capture the sort of the hostility in my mind, the heat of its setting of where it is, and but it doesn't, for me, it doesn't sort of soften it. It sort of amplifies it, and I externally, it does all that it's supposed to. It's small windows, flat roof, and as you say, the white sort of reflects the heat and everything. But it just it's so austere, and then because it is so austere, because it's almost like a warning of like, it's hot here. It's really really hot, and all we can give you is a little tiny like A4 sized window for you.
That's a good point actually. Natural light is
so maybe it's like, is it the building kind of communicates the hostility of where it is to you? So that's maybe what I'm sort of that, and I
think it was meant to be for in case they came under attack by invaders as well. The small windows would help. As you say, it doesn't make it more livable, does it? It doesn't make it a joy to live in having small windows.
Yeah, but I guess if it, if it's showing that, in order to maintain your, cool and comfortable, that's what you need to do. But then, it's it just feels, it does feel like, very a fortress against physical and, people and nature. But there's I don't know if you've shown it. There's the internal photos. I do quite enjoy the starkness of contrast. The one that I've got up here shows the internal timbers. The floor joists, which are just rough trunks, stripped, and then they're nicely stained, and there's something quite satisfying about that. And it looks more in the view through the property and through the house into the nature around it is maybe more of a satisfying. It brings a bit more heart to it. But I guess I keep coming back to how this whitewash everywhere. In the top two there, just that. How can that ever stay that white? And it's just a little bit cold, too cold.
Apparently, it was meant the kitchen walls were usually black with soot due to the inhabitants mainly cooking on the floor as well.
Oh yeah,
it's quite interesting.
But the lower images are, more features of domestic life and such like coming through there. But again, it's like even the shelf is all painted white. But as you said, in it, they're very stripped back. There is not, it does sort of, the interiors do make me think of a few of the more austere kind of arts and crafts of style and approach, but this is even more stark. And it's funny that these exposed joists are becoming a fashion again. That revealing the structure, whereas most houses are plasterboarded and hidden away.
God,
But then it's like, as much as seeing the nice sort of timbers there, great. But it's like nowadays it's like a modern spin on it, like a super engineered timbers or something.
Guess it does have austerity. I'm just wondering, why is it this think is it's an austere building, but and then the ones in Oya in Greece, the final buildings, we're going to show that they're austere as well, but there's more romance and charm to the buildings in Oya, even though they're austere buildings. For me, there's an absolute magical charm to that little village.
I think even the previous buildings were not, they're not, ornament. I guess sometimes, maybe I'm being, I don't know if this really is, I'm being right in this, but I feel like sometimes those critical of ornamentation sort of think of a Baroque excess, the sort of wedding cake, the kind of extravagance that. Whereas, actually, I think most ornament is, it's quite humble, and also I someone told me once that the where ornament really should be. You don't just put something in the middle of a wall. It's at a moments of juncture, or resolve. So as you say, like you were pointing out the eaves detail and the pinnacles and stuff. They're natural moments where a little flourish can come out.
Yeah.
I guess a building like this, there's a flat roof, and so there is no junction with the junction's nothing. It's there's nothing to work with. But it doesn't have to be much. Even I was doing a project recently with another architect, and they were just they had just expressed the end of the rafters coming down, and they had a long rafter foot, so it extended a few feet over beyond the wall, and then it was nicely carved, very simply though. So this is the structure of the building. It's not so you're suddenly taking the structure and elevating it slightly. And it create and going back to your point about shadow and light, that was suddenly it. You had this nice shadow edge around the edge, around the perimeter of the property, and it nicely caught up this little bit of cutting, the slight sculpting of the tip of this rafter. And I think that's what would help. This is still Ibiza, and I guess maybe once upon a time Ibiza wasn't quite the hub of degeneracy that it is today. But
I mean that's all I knew it as as a kid, like Kevin and Perry. Club 18 to 30. That was all I used to know it for anyway. But unfortunately,
oh dear, I dread to think what I heard stuff of what went on in these things, but I just, it does feel almost like though that the place was, I guess, looking back at the hay, the hay, sorry, what are they called, the hay bales, what was the second one we were looking at? I've forgotten the name of it. The ones,
the hay rack.
The hay rack. So even though that was largely functional, kind of for the utility of drying out the straw and the hay, they still found moments to express a little of themselves and in the forms of it, and it is sort of striking that here, even though there's sort of there's chances somewhere in these that hasn't happened as much. I guess it asks somewhat cultural questions and historical questions of these areas, but
it's funny how I wonder how that change did take place in Ibiza. How did that cultural change happen, and like when it turned into like the rave capital of Europe? The electronic dance music capital of Europe. It's funny.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering, was there something? Are we seeing something that wasn't quite right even back then, But forgive me. Forgive me if I'm completely wrong there. That Ibiza was a glorious place once upon a time, but I mean I have heard that apparently half of it's nice, half of it's horrible. But looking back to student days, there was when I did my master's, one of the units was based in Ibiza, and it was run by a man-child tutor who he was in his 40s,
Right.
and our units were called like Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, but
Yeah.
he called his was Unit 5, but he actually called it Zone 5.
Right.
And he was a DJ in Ibiza.
Oh, really?
And every year he would take his unit, all the students, their project was based in Ibiza, and he would take them all to Ibiza, and it was just it was supposedly a study trip, but it was just a big piss up, and and he would and he would join in with he'd probably be more of a drug and alcohol taker than the his students.
Should be the other way around, shouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, it just so shows how kind of everything's just gone wrong. But yeah, I mean, he fully embraced, and it was all about the future and the hedonism. The project was the outlook was always.
That's what I think. When I think about Ibiza, I think of hedonism.
But it was like the future. It's just like being able to do more of that. It's like the goal of mankind is to shed our burdens so we can, insert inappropriate remark of what someone may do in Ibiza, whatever that may be. But it tied into this sort of obsession with technology and the latest fad, was always VR, but what was always
virtual reality headset.
Yeah, exactly. And they had one set up in the studio space where they could the idea is you can tour someone's home, before it's been built, before you finish designing it, but then they'd end up just playing computer games. But I think they were. I think it was like they like to say that they thought that architecture. This is the tutor. Wasn't it wasn't a physical thing. It was like a state of mind or something like that. Some pretentious crap. But
you mentioned that there's a great book by Johanni Plasma. Now you mentioned the VR headset and that. Plasma's got a great book called The Thinking Hand. It's about 150 pages or so. We'll have to cover it sometime. But my point was I was going to make about it was that in it he talks about the importance of drawing and making hand models, and and it ties into the site analysis we were talking about earlier, but how important the connection between the hand and the brain is, and drawing. And that connection, and you build up when you do overlays, with tracing paper or baking paper, sketches of the site, your sections and your plans of the site and perspectives and little construction details and all these sketches you're doing. You're building up a mental map in your mind of the site and the project, and it becomes like second nature, doing it after a while. You build up like an intimate connection. From drawing with your project.
If I could share a rather depressing thing I overheard the other day, I went to a networking event for sort of construction, and inevitably the whole kind of post-COVID kind of review of things. And this guy who's just become a director of the company he worked for, architect, was hearing on the fact that he'd finally had the sort of lever to pull to to get rid of the last drawing board that was in the office because of the social distancing requirements. And apparently he'd been banging on about like getting rid of this drawing board. It's always in the way. It's, taking up space. And he was just, I was overhearing it, and he was just like, oh, thank goodness, finally got rid of it. And I was thinking like, gosh, like, okay, I largely use CAD software. It's part of just having to, survival to work. But I've done a couple of projects on drawing boards. I still use it primarily as, like, as you say, like there's something about the building up of, developing the thinking around it through drawing by hand, and especially on a design level, because you might redraw something very slightly differently multiple times, and each time you're drawing it, you're kind of going through the space in your mind, and there's a very particular activity that Control C, Control V doesn't really capture. And I think I think I made this point before, and it's a point I kind of want to come back to at some point, and maybe I try and dwell on it a bit, write about it or something. Is the change in thinking, the type of person that the type of person that's more comfortable with the drop down menu, compared to the person with a pencil and a piece of paper. That it's like it is like an extrovert introvert. It's opposites in many ways, and I think and I think that unavoidably has to have an effect on the design and the nature of design that you're producing, the quality and the
I think we touched on it last time, didn't we? It's I think we mentioned about it kills any romantic types, getting on and getting ahead, I guess, in architecture. It kills that romantic spirit, or anyone with any like soul and spirit and authenticity, or it doesn't promote that, does it? It promotes the flashy, instant, picture, that you can, that instant render, that you can put on Instagram or in a magazine.
It just, I think it turns the whole approach to the profession in a very different direction, and then it's just going to bed down in that line that I think is just going to, the chasm will open up between these kind of elements of the profession. I'm curious to see what happened. I can't quite work it out, because the advantage of all this computerized stuff is I guess to some extent there's cost saving, but as long as it's pretty banal, regular, repetitive building. But even then, they still seem to cost a fortune. I think that was there was a question raised at the event somewhere about this, and I think I do think like a fallacy, I believe. I probably don't think I can super tightly argue this, but I think it's a fallacy that the ornament is an indulgent kind of cost that you just can't afford it. But and modernism is all about efficiency. But so often I see in designs and is immense inefficiency. I worked on a project that my old director designed it, and it was this fairly unremarkable sort of Victorian terrace house, or semi-detached, and we did a rear extension, and it was a brick, kind of fairly conventional gable end projected out at 90 degrees to the main house, and then there was a wraparound single story thing that was all a bit crazy and angles and whatnot, but the client wanted it open plan, so when we got to the technical stage, we had a floating brick building in the middle of this room, and the architect I was working for was like, kind of whoops, we're going to have to pop some columns in there in the middle of their open plan room.
Yeah.
And then but then we got the structural engineer involved to get do them and he loved it because he was like, hang on a minute, and he did this incredibly elaborate structural system. It was two beams picking up two leaves of masonry wall, and then this cranked bespoke beam, so angled, so this beam angled up to pick up this thing. It was huge steel, just huge, in this tiny extension, because it was a floating brick building. The whole first floor and roof was floating. And I think that's a great example of the cost to have done that. You could have sculpted a beautiful Capitol, or put just some nice little moments of some refined detail somewhere in the property, and probably had a better space in the end, because you could have just done something more logical, more orderly, so therefore you aren't having to do anything sort of challenging to fight with the nature of loading and forces. And I see that. I think that's a really common thing in even more extreme in that this sort of, it's because it's all very expressive, and you can't not do what you want to do, so you just get your structural engineer and they'll spec some crazy bit of steel and your client will pay for it. But so I think the fallacy of we're switched one cost for another is my argument, and traditional architecture, designing in a largely orthogonal way, right angles, logical structural loads, with in an easy traditional fashion that every builder is not having to, what the hell are you talking about here? They can focus on doing getting the main structure done, and then you've got time and money, hopefully, or the money left over to add some nice little moments.
I think with the computer as well, I think Plasma makes a great point in The Thinking Hand, I think, where he says something like, with like a mouse on a computer, the mouse, everyone clicks the mouse in like the exact same way, but then when it comes to drawing, everyone draws differently.
How you hold the pencil and what sort of pencil you pick. I do love all that. You're right. And I when I've worked in a larger office, when you're surrounded by about like 20 people all clicking away, there's something like it's I kind of find it hilarious as well that we design buildings using a mouse and a keyboard designed for word processing. When you think, I think when you think about it like that, it's I think it's slightly regressive in many ways. That even though we use this very intelligent software, which is very beneficial, it's time saving. It means I can largely work on my own, but pressing Control D or Control Shift D, to manipulate lines and clicks is something.
It's machine-like, in it, and mechanical.
You're just plugging in the numbers, and that's why I think yeah, it's great to be able to do produce more work than I otherwise would be able to. But I try and keep how important it is to keep drawing as an integral part of what I do, and that's why I would say to anyone who doing if I doing architecture is still draw in as in any kind of drawing. I just think that language or that skill is paramount. It's not just the images you make, it's just how it's training your eye to really follow something.
How you communicate your ideas as well, and developing your own style and your own individual architectural approach, because I think it does come back to as well. Everyone draws differently, and also as a consequence of that individuality will be expressed in your building. Hopefully, where you won't have a situation hopefully where every building looks the same like it does now. Whatever building it is, we have.
But that's the. I mean, that you've touched straight away there, isn't it? It's like there's I've seen it in even my old university building. It was relatively new, and I remember we were some of my friends were kind of looking at it going, oh, this is clearly like it's you can tell that it's designed in something like a Rhino or a 3D software where there's sort of booleans and extractions, extrusions have taken place. You can sort of see the fingerprint of the software. How that's governed the design more so really than the hand of someone.
Very interesting. More buildings are getting built like that, unfortunately. So the last building for you folks is it's the village of Oia, which is on the Greek island of Santorini. The two main types of building on Oia are the Oikophilia and the Cappadocia. I know I've butchered that. But the Oikophilia or Poskaphos were traditionally lived in by labourers, farmers and sailors, whilst the Cappadocia were lived in by ship captains. The cave houses in which the labourers, farmers and sailors lived in, the cave houses were dug into the rock face and are usually narrow and deep, with the living room at the front and kitchen and bedrooms at the back and a toilet outside. Due to the arrangement of the cave houses, one person's courtyard is the roof of another person's cave house. The houses for the ship owners and captains were bigger and more opulent. The captains' houses were built during a period of prosperity for the village in the late 19th and 20th century in a neoclassical style. The neoclassical style fitted in well with the site, as the ship captains' houses were usually still contained many vernacular elements. The captains' houses were usually multi-storied and had big courtyards. On the ground floor were rooms for the kitchen, bedrooms and cistern, as well as a wine room. Walls were generally constructed on Oia. The walls are generally constructed using black igneous rock, and red rock is mainly used for domes and arches. Some of the buildings still retain their earthy tones and haven't been painted white, but there are numerous stories as to why the buildings are white. One story is the houses were painted in white lime water in order to allow the water which runs over the walls to be collected in a cistern. Another is that the village inhabitants painted their houses white as an act of defiance against their Ottoman rulers, who banned the flying of the Greek flag during their 400-plus year rule of Greece. Others say they were painted white simply to keep the buildings cool. In 1976, Oya was included in the government's national tourism organisation, which had as one of its aims the conservation of Greece's architectural heritage. Many of the cave houses ended up becoming guest houses, hotels, and restaurants. And the cave houses face the south and west, and as a result receive lots of sunlight. A mixture of twigs, stems from grapes, stone, earth, and lime was used as a cement for the stone barrel of vaults. And I forgot what I mentioned something else as well about them. Unfortunately the fishing and shipping declined in the 20th century, which is why now it's generally a tourist spot. But in its prime, it had lots of had 130 ships in its prime, and that was when it had 2,500 people living in the village as well. So like a lot of ships, and they grew their own wine as well on the plateaus, and they exported them to France, and that helped to make them rich as well. And they built lots of churches in the village as well. So what are your thoughts on the village of Oya? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, actually, but
I think that sounds right to me. Yeah, I think once you were picking out the similarities between this place and the previous Ibiza farmhouse. I think this image kind of captures where this succeeds, where the others didn't. It's the other one was rather singular and austere in that way, whereas I think that what's so successful, what's so captivating here is it's not really one building, it's not one house, it's the landscape of it, it's how it's all interwoven into the hillside, and
the organic feel of it.
Yeah, and the little moments of you've got the windmill and then the dome and then the small the lanes and the streets, and you get all the glimpses and of different aspects, and and again the lighting comes up again. You can see how here as the sun sets and moves across it's picking up different planes and different corners that would be maybe, and then plunging others into darkness. And so I think even though individually some of these are not that far off the Ibiza farmhouse, that and maybe even these are still quite modest individually as well. There's a real delight and charm and in the composition of them all. I'm immediately drawn into these lanes and just imagining what it is like to walk down those lanes, and that kind of
it looks magical, doesn't it? I'd love to visit it someday.
I feel like it's like it would be like Venice but on a hill, isn't it? So I can imagine sort of going around a really sort of dark corner and then suddenly getting an amazing glimpse of like something in the distance, or another building that's nicely sort of caught by the sun and such, like just so many sort of beautiful incidental moments. So I think it orderly individual homes, but then nicely sort of disorderly and kind of sort of haphazard, but in a it's like it's not fully. This is a kind of contextual question again, isn't it? It hasn't ordered that hillside. It hasn't too much. It hasn't gone. It's not been too defined to sort of square it off or sort of straighten it out. Terrace, you make an even terrace or anything, like stratified layers.
I should add as well that it was built into a caldera as well. So I think it was it used to be a volcano, I think.
Right.
Which is another interesting element to it as well. And to use the language of a Jordan Peterson, it is, as you say, it's got that chaos and order to it. That nice combination, that nice balance.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, and there's some other photos at night that are great because the dynamic changes. So here you've got the sun down on it. Yeah, sort of nicely picking up like the roofs and everything. And if you've got any photos at night, the streets then glow, and it's almost like it picks out a different. Here you see the little. Well, it's pedestrian street. You're not going to get anything else up there. Maybe a donkey. But I think that if you have any sort of the time of day and the lighting, picking out the different kind of grains within the city. So during the day you'll get the high level and the properties, the roofs and everything, and then as the sun sets and as the lights come up, you get the lanes and the streets kind of appear almost like the kind of these little twisting veins and such like. Oh yeah, and then great use of color and nicely picking out like the little is it inkle nooks, or the window inlets.
Yeah, great little nooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, like built into the cliff face, those little nooks acting as a shelf. That's a beautiful little detail.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well there you go. That's there's your shadows.
So I'm guessing that's the church bells.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just used to.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they are, but I'm just because I'm used to. Well, we're used to having the church bells inside the church, aren't we? Within the church.
Yeah.
You're a robot in there, Red.
Hang on.
You was a robot in there, Ed.
Hang on, I'll just check that I'm not running out of battery. And 1 sec. Mhm. Hello. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah.
Oh, hey. Sorry about that. My
That's all right.
headphones died on me.
So you sound fine.
Sorry, what was that?
You say you sound fine without it.
Oh, that's good. Well, I've just changed. Yeah, sorry, where were we?
Church bells, I think, and
Oh,
shadow.
yeah.
So this is the captain's houses here, and you can see how it differs. At least the facades do anyway. But
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, we were looking at the church bells, and yeah, I think that is a particular feature of like exposed bells, and that came up at some point recently. But I mean, this is yeah, I think this sort of is heightened, isn't it? Even in all the kind of quite all the white sort of low-rise buildings, and then you have this. I mean, it's, great. I mean, quite. I'm trying just looking at some of the detailing there. It's quite unusual. Some particular classical detailing there. I'm not familiar with. Yeah.
no, me neither.
Just the detailing above the doors there in particular, and this the rusticated columns. And it looks like almost it's either a Corinthian or even like a composite there at the top. Very even though it's a bit more form. Obviously a formal building. It's very particular. I mean, from particular kind of specific Greek classical styling. So I don't know if
Beautiful.
you, yeah, I don't know if you if you've heard this, it's a debate, or for this architect I used to work for, he was like a postmodernist. He loved to put in bold colours. And he used to complain. He was Australian, and he used to complain about the fact that he'd never heard the phrase like, "I find that colour offensive," before coming to England, and he found this just outrageous. These unsophisticated, frightened of colour, or the colour they want is like beige or something. And I kind of, and the counter argument that he'd hear was like, oh, the lighting isn't right, blah blah blah. And I think well, I kind of think they're both wrong, but I think color is great, but it definitely benefits certain types of tones, of having that certain type of that it's the angle, it's the intensity, that kind of reflected light that you get in the Mediterranean. I mean, that blue is fantastic, how it sits next to the sea and sky. But
light and
but I think it is I think the use of color is, I think we underuse color, but currently, whereas I think historically we've actually been quite good at using color. But I think the right tone and the right hues and everything, you have to tune into the setting you're in, and I think that does that perfectly, because it's not just a mimic. It's not just the hue of the sea or the sky. It nicely kind of crosses between them, and then you've got the sort of peachy pink of the bell tower on the right. I think that's something that I've been noticing a lot lately. In the autumn time, you get these fantastic sunrises and sunsets. Like the sky is, it's like that, the angle of the light, I think, and how it hits the clouds and the atmosphere and such. Like, you get these sort of softer, these particular tones and hues that come through. It's fantastic.
As you say, it's how you choose to use color, how you use color. It's very important. Using it in the right situations and in the right manner. I think similar with say curved walls, like you mentioned earlier, with like everything being curved or angular. It always seems like choosing when to use a curved wall as well. That where you place that in your plan, or it's instead of having curves everywhere, it's they can be quite powerful if you just use them sparingly, or in like the most appropriate manner to add to your like a point of departure in your design.
I think I think
it's definitely underused. Definitely colour, as you say, it's not not used that much, and it's people don't seem to know how to use it.
Well, that's it. I think
in the past.
Yeah, because I think it's either a dull, barely notice it, or it's pop. It's the most garish, sort of artificial tones, and I had this debate with this architect I worked for, and I was, he wanted to paint, and the building was actually painted. He changed my spec of it. I was thinking, this house was just outside of Oxford, and there was brick in the area, it was brick in the building, but then also slate, and I thought he wanted to paint this timber extension that we'd done blue, but I did on the drawings like a sort of flint blue, like a grey blue, that was slightly and because I thought that was more in keep, just the tonal quality of it, I thought worked. Anyway, my director overrode me, and he changed it to this really artificial, intense blue, and they actually did it, and it looked terrible, and the owners hated it. And they were like, we've done it as you suggested, but we're already planning on painting over it, because it's again, it's a contextual thing as well. Like, I think maybe the problem with like that blue there, that it can kind of sit on the land a bit as opposed to sink into it. If that was in in more of that form and that color, in more of a a valley in England or something, or Wales or something, I think would kind of sit on the land more too awkwardly. Whereas in this context, it kind of doesn't matter that it kind of has that more kind of dropped on top, because of the very nature of the fact you've got the sea there, and the mountainous kind of dropping and rising of the land in that particular way, and the hardness of the actual texture there. There's very few greenery here. There's no trees. It's very arid and sparse, and so that nicely sits in that wider context. So I think that use of color, I think it's just getting those subtle tonal choices right. And there are a lot of history of some color around the UK. I think it's a weird kind of, probably a post-war austerity kind of desire to be a bit kind of modest, and then that becomes sort of everyone then sort of.
They didn't like colour, did they? As well, I don't think the modernists. It was.
Well, yeah. I mean, the irony is, the slagging off, or the cliche slagging off, is to say, like, the English don't like colour; they're sort of afraid of it. But then also the modernists were all about white. There was a huge amount of sort of principles and philosophies into why everything should be white. I mean, as part of that kind of neutralizing that anywhere, I see it as it can, in the wrong context, it kind of cuts out the landscape. I think the Villa Savoye cuts out the landscape. It doesn't sit, or it sits on the landscape. Whereas I think these, sit in and with the landscape, even though they are similar in somewhat typology and share some similar language of features and such like. It's just deployed correctly, or just it's deployed coherently.
Yeah, very much the Villa Savoye. Definitely, it's you get the feeling it's an object placed on top of the landscape, rather than sitting in the landscape in a harmonious fashion. It's I heard an interesting theory on Corbusier's Villa Savoye. It was a BBC documentary. I think it was called A Tale of Three Cities. I think one episode they did New York, one in Vienna, and one in Paris. I think it was all at the early 20th century, about the arts and culture in those cities. And the episode in Paris touched on Le Corbusier and his architecture and his purist villas. And they mentioned his Villa Savoye, which is obviously his most famous purist white villa. Just a little tidbit he said, but it always stuck with me as an interesting theory. He said, like, as you enter the Villa Savoye, some context before that, it's I'll give the Villa Savoye being painted white, and also like Le Corbusier saw he in when he read Adolf Loos's infamous essay "Ornament and Crime," which compared ornament to degeneracy, he said that that for him it was a Homeric cleansing. So, and he was meant to see like the white villas as being like a cleansing of society, cleansing it of its, the impurity of, ornament, or, getting to the essential elements of what architecture, of what he thought architecture should be. And which is why this is, it probably sounds ridiculous when I say it, but the presenter said, I think he gave his theory of there's like there's a place to wash your hands immediately, as you enter the Villa Savoie, and he was saying how he thought that it was Le Corbusier's way of saying, you're coming out from you're leaving the unclean world and you're coming into the pure world now, as an act of washing your hand. I know it sounds what's the word, overly sounds a bit ridiculous, or a bit over, like being intellectual for the sake of being intellectual. I thought it was an interesting thing the presenter, came up with.
But I think that's right. I think he's onto something there, though. That there is, I think that that's a kind of sums up a little bit of all that we highlight of what's lost, or what of this vernacular architecture that we don't see anymore is it's kind of like the mess of life is being cleared away, and that but it's cleared everything away, because all of this is a bit haphazard, and it's unregulated. It's not architects. It's just things are happening. You're responding to just what's there, and there's cultural kind of influences. There's the current climatic issues, but it's haphazard and messy, and but it's real. It's earthy and raw and human, and a bit chaotic. Whereas the design there, it sort of reveals a hand and of what they're all about, is what the modernists, and what still grounds architecture, is this desire to kind of make perfect, and iron
everything.
Get away that dirty human, get away that diseased dirty human, and put a mask on them architecturally as well, isn't it? It's
almost like with the modernists, it's like they're trying to unite all under heaven and earth under one banner,
yeah,
trying to like everything the same. And I know I've said this quote before, but I think it's pretty apt, to be honest, with what we're talking about. It's from David Bowie had a song called "I'm Afraid of Americans," and Bowie describes the feelings behind the song when he says, "It's not as truly hostile about Americans as, say, Born in the USA. It's merely sardonic. I was travelling in Java when its first McDonald's went up. It was like, for fuck's sake, the invasion by any homogenized culture is so depressing. The erection of another Disney World in, say, Umbria, Italy, more so. It strangles the indigenous culture and narrows the expression of life." So, that particular, what is particularly apt to that quote is the end bit where he says it strangles the indigenous culture and narrows expression of life.
Yeah, well, yeah, it can't tolerate. Well, I think it's life full stop. It can't tolerate that chaos, and I think we see that more and more now. It is all of this. There's the problem with modernism. It comes from an attitude that it wants this absolute order, this on earth, and it doesn't want us, as people, as individuals in any sense, or as communities, to get in the way or to disrupt it, or kind of it's I think it came up in the lectures as well. Is another Scruton quote where he was saying like this, seeing another sort of glass box, massive glass box. He was saying this building doesn't care about you. That I think is something along those lines.
Yeah,
and I think that's it. It's like it as opposed to being inviting and all about
having good manners.
The celebrating the domestic life and all, being perfectly in tune with domestic life, or as we're seeing here, tuning in with our spiritual life and our connection with God. These buildings have this are intricately interconnected with us as both our physical and spiritual or metaphysical, all of this. Whereas now, what are buildings connected to? The stock exchange,
The state.
Yeah,
the state and big business. That's about it.
Yeah, exactly. And what is it? Multinational companies that are, and an elite few of who will,
ruleless cosmopolitans, essentially. Yeah. They have no allegiance to any people or any land.
Yeah.
Which you see that with the World Economic Forum a lot. They have no. They're not connected to any people or any land or any religion, any creed, apart from their utopian project, which it's become a lot clearer the last 5 years, especially how fundamentally horrible their metaphysics is. We're living through it right now, with the whole scientism, with the disease that shall not be named, but because Susan didn't want me to talk about it. But you see the whole the scientism, and the whole seeing everyone as a unit, basically. Not seeing them as
an inconvenient unit as well.
Inconvenient unit, not as a man made in the image of God, with a soul that needs to be nourished. It's just as a unit, some biological organism which is ruining the planet, and basically, it seems like their whole metaphysics is to abolish any diversity within the world, any true diversity, such as the vernacular architecture that we've talked about in this episode.
Exactly. And you can move around we've just moved around a very small area, and we see great variety, and and all of this is sadly, it's all frozen in time. It's like I think that's the sort of lamenting side of studying this. Is I don't believe, well, at least we'd almost need a few generations to pass to sort of almost rid themselves of the the mindset of now to then be able to design and live in this way, to rediscover that authenticity and that so they aren't constantly questioning everything, and they can live live intuitively and
I remember what you said the last episode. It stuck with me. You said, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like perhaps the best thing we can do is just to pass the torch on to the next generation. You know, in terms of the architecture. You know, keeping that flame lit for promoting good architecture.
Yeah, I think it's just it's showing that you can still build these things. You can still build buildings in a proper, with good design, but also just it passing down that knowledge. So even if it does sort of sink away for a few generations, it's still there, ready to re-emerge.
With their metaphysics as well, like their ultimate aim is the creation of an artificial human, you know, of artificial intelligence. That is their ultimate goal that they're trying to build towards. You know, it's not. It's yeah. And looking at everything in terms of data and units and that's, you know, and cells, and that's very much reflected in the architecture. I mean, you can hardly turn a page of Le Corbusier's The City of Tomorrow and its planning, or his The Architecture of Tomorrow, without him mentioning the unit or the cell, or you know, functionalism, or you know, how rational his architecture is, how, you know, standardized it is and progressive it is, which is very much what, you know, the guiding principles of our own era. I think that is. That's. I think AA did a great video on the logic behind libertarians or liberals and the communists, in terms of, I know there'll be there's a lot greater degree of subtlety, but basically, essentially, it's the communists and the libertarians are part of the same dialectic, in terms of they're both. Well, libertarians believe that, you know, their way of doing things will lead to greater, the most amount of freedom and the most amount of services and goods, whereas, you know, the communists believe that ultimately their methods will lead to greater freedom and greater services of goods. But then, I was going to say, it doesn't. Both of them, it leads ultimately to the sacrificing, you know, the spiritual.
It's what freedom, you know, what freedom are you getting? And I think that's really important questions that are being raised at the moment.
When I say libertarians, I generally mean more like the left-leaning libertarians would say, you know, like the Cato Institute. Well, we've had, the way it's played out since the French Revolution is we've had in terms of liberalism, I think we've had more the French Revolution, you know, liberalism, rather than say the type of liberalism that someone like radical liberation would advocate for.
And I think on the architectural front, I think
it's reflected in the buildings, isn't it, on the architecture?
Yeah, but it's the counter argument for me saying, you know, I think fundamentally I kind of think at this stage all we can really do as architects is, or as a traditional architect, is to, as I say, you know, pass the torch on, or the baton on, just kind of keep the flame alive a little bit, and and what architecture we're fortunate to create, you know, is just drawing upon what's there. So we don't need to add ourselves or our ego to it. But the counter argument would be, what about my freedom to kind of express myself? What about my message for now? And I think that's where a lot of,
or my freedom to be able to construct a building that's taller than St. Paul's or Il Duomo in Florence. you know.
And to capture my age and the and all this and I guess I sit more and more uneasily with that, and having maybe once upon a time been kind of given that a bit more credence. Interesting. I am starting to flag a little bit.
Yeah, me too. I think
we've hit the 3-hour mark.
Yeah, I think we're about finished. It's a beautiful windmill.
That's fantastic. Yeah, gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing church.
Yeah.
Yep, that's the end of it.
Brilliant.
Right. Well, that's it for today, folks. Join us next time, where hopefully we'll be discussing something interesting again as well. Thanks for streaming with me, Ed. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure as always. Good to talk.
Right, and we are out. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.